Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. On today's tutorial I'm going to be painting a beach shoreline with maybe a sunset sun reflecting in the water's edge there. So as usual, I'm using the app Procreate on an iPad. I've just opened one of the default A4 canvas sizes, and if you want to use the exact same colours that I'm using, well, I've put a link in the description to this video, and if you follow that link it will take you to my Patreon page and you can download the colour file for free. Or if you just want to take down the hexadecimal codes that are down in the description, you can go to the value section within the colours on Procreate, type them in here, press enter, the colour will appear here and you can just tap it into the creation of your own palette. The reason I provide them is because the camera that I'm using sometimes oversaturates the colours, so at least you know if you've taken the exact colours, it's going to be accurate. And in terms of the brushes I'm using, I'm going to use the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to use probably a medium brush too. So the first thing I'm going to do on my first layer is go to my colours. I'm going to select my first colour and I'm just going to drag it into my canvas so it's going to fill it. Now if I look on the colour wheel, you can see it's pretty much a grey colour and it's going to be probably appearing a little bit more blue by the time we put other things into our scene, but initially it is actually a grey colour. We're going to create another layer. We're going to go back to our colours and we're going to pick the second colour along. We're going to go onto the airbrushing, use the soft brush. We're going to increase the size of our brush to 10%. We're going to put the opacity at around 70%. And I'm just going to think where I want the middle point to be. That's pretty much where I'm going to put the horizon line. But I want this second colour to be above that point. So it's just about, well, roughly about 2/3 of the way up. Maybe even a little bit higher than that. And I've just gone over it a couple of times, like that. And I'll keep moving that up into the sky a little bit, like that. The next thing we're going to do is go back to my colours. I'm going to select the third colour along. And about halfway in that area and upwards, I'm going to use this colour. Go back to my colours, fourth colour along, and I'm going to use that at the very top. Then I'm going to go onto my adjustments, the Gaussian blur. I want to affect the whole layer, and I'm just going to slide it across to about 40%. And that's going to create a nice sort of colour blend for us. That's going to work quite well. What I do think I need to do is to go to the transform, check you're on freeform, squish it in a little bit, and I'm just taking it a little bit further up so we're getting a bit more of this blue band higher up in our scene. Next thing I'm going to do is create another layer, stick on the soft brush. I'm going to skip to these colours, so I'm going to go straight to this colour, and you can see it's actually a little bit more red than it is orange, but it appears more orange. I'm going to put it at around 8% size and around 30% opacity. And I'm going to go down into the blue area, and I can always move this, but I'm going to aim for roughly about the centre. I'm just going to start tapping in that area where I think I want the sun to be, like that. A few times is good enough. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush to around 5%. Go back to my colours. I'm going to pick this yellow colour, and in the very centre, I'm just going to start bringing out some yellow. Tap it a few times. That seems to work. Then we'll go back to our colours on the white, and just reduce it down to 4% this time, but I'm going to turn the opacity up to 70%, and we're going to aim, if we can always zoom in, go straight for the very center and start to tap a few times until we're really bringing out some intensity. Keep tapping, and then we've really brought out a bright color there for our sun. Now if we go to the layer, you can see the layer that the sun is on. More ways of intensifying it is you can duplicate it, like so, and it really brings out some of the warm colours too. What often happens is you get banding like this. There are ways of sorting that out. You can go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, but instead of affecting the whole layer, we can go to the pencil setting and we can check the size of our brush and we can just start to soften some of these bands in if we need to. I'm just doing it in circular motions, just starting to blend it in, and you can see the settings it's on, and it's on 60%. We can just blend some of those banding issues away. Now the reason we're not doing the entire layer is we don't want to lose the crisp edge of that sun there really. We just want to reduce the banding probably around the edge there. And we could turn the opacity of it down, and again we could move a little bit closer just to help blend it in, like so. Tap out of the adjustments. So when we zoom back out, we can see some real intensity there now being brought into that. We'll go back to our layers. We'll pinch those two together So we can create another layer, and this layer we can put behind the sun, and go back to my brushes, make sure I'm on the soft brush. I'm going to put it at around 10% size, but I'm going to keep the strength of the brush really low at about 5%. And you can see here we've got the sun, then we've got a cooler area again, and then I want above that to create a warm glowing area. So concentrated in the area just above where the sun is going to be, we can just start to build up the glow in that area perhaps, but we don't want to interfere with that nice grey blue colour. We'll just take it a little bit to the edges, but mainly we want that concentration in the middle. We're going to create another layer. We'll stick on the soft brush, but we're going to turn it really much lower to around 3%. We'll put it up to around 50% opacity. Then we're going to go back to our colours, but we're going to begin on the second row of colours. So I'm going to use the first two colours to begin with. So I'll use this colour, and you can see it's quite a green colour, or almost a green blue colour that's quite greyed out. So we use that one to begin with. And I'm just going to have this colour cutting across where the horizon is going to be. Now that I've started to divide this space up, I feel like I want to expand the amount of room that I'm going to have available for the water and the reflection and other things on the shore. And that's easy enough to do. We can always amend the layers that we've got here. So if we just backtrack, we've got that warm glow, we've got the colours at the top, we'll pinch those together, and we've also got the sun. So we just need to move those elements a little bit. And this is something that you'll constantly find with digital art, and it's one of the great advantages of it, is that you can shift and change things. So I'm just going to narrow that a little bit more even towards the top, go to the sun, make sure I'm on uniform, because if I want to shrink it, I don't want to distort it. I'm going to reduce the size of it. Perhaps I've reduced the size of it a little too much, but I'm going to move it a little bit further up anyway, somewhere about there. Then I can go back to my layers, the layer that I drew that line on, and then maybe I can start to even think about moving that upwards a little bit as well. So I want this horizon line to be a little bit closer to the actual center of my composition, and everything else is going to have to be above that point. Go back to my colors. I'm using again a mixture between those two colors, so I'll switch to my other color momentarily, and I'm just going to start creating some features with this. So I want some kind of land feature off it into the distance, roughly halfway up. And I'm going to alternate between the two colours, just breaking up the colours so it's not all of one colour, it's a mixture of the two. Perhaps a little bit more of the green off towards the edge. I'm going to cover this section with another thing anyway. And then more of this almost purple grey towards the sun perhaps, like that. Then I can reduce the size of that brush to the lower end of 2%, zoom in a little bit more, and I just perhaps want to sharpen up some of those details on that horizon, just so it doesn't look like a clumsy brush mark. Create some little textures, little things here and there that might stick up. Who knows what they are? They're off in the distance. It doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't look, like I say, like a clumsy brush mark. I'm not worrying about that side, I'm going to cover that up anyway. And I can go back with my green colour, and I'm just breaking up the texture really there, or adding texture rather. A little bit of a variety, two different kind of colours. If I wanted to perhaps use the green, so perhaps towards the bottom part and off towards the edge over here is a better place to use that colour. And then perhaps the purple, like I was saying, more when it actually reaches the sun, and more maybe towards the top edge. Okay, we're going to add water here, so don't worry too much about the bottom edge. It isn't really a problem. I'm going to create another layer, go back to my colours, and I'm going to use these three colours now to create another section of land that cuts in front. So I'm going to use this colour to begin with, and this third colour is going to be a really dominant colour in our scene. So I'll just place it up to 4% opacity, that size rather, and I'll put the opacity at around 75%. And as I was saying, this is going to cut in front of, and therefore it's higher up, obscuring what I did on that side. So it didn't really matter what I did behind that section. And it's going to come down. In fact, we can sharpen our brush, put it down to around the 2%, and bring it down to meet the water somewhere in this region. And then we can increase it back up to the 4% size, and we can just start to fill in more areas over here. In fact, let's increase the size. Let's speed this up a little bit. We'll put it up to around 10% size. Just fill this in. We're going to reclaim quite a lot of this, but initially there's no harm in just filling in a good section of it. So we've got a bit of a diagonal direction for it. Okay, go back to our colours. We'll use the fourth colour along now, and we'll reduce the size of our brush back down to 2%, top end of 2%. Let's just test the colour. You can see it's a lot darker, so I'm going to reduce the strength of it down to about 40%. So it's still quite impactful, but it's just not overkill. And now I'm going to begin adding a change of tone. Perhaps there's some sections up here where there's banks of grass just on the top mound on our beach, and that might go all the way across. It helps just separate this foreground element compared to the background features. Maybe just start to tap it as it goes more over here, have it as more broken textures, give it a bit more width because it's getting closer to us over at this edge, but we're having it quite broken, quite dappled really. Maybe we could turn it down to around 20% strength, and then we're starting to bring some more features in a lower section too. So again, I'm keeping it quite, and I'll show you here in another section, I'm doing this kind of texture really, where I'm creating an overall band, but it's made up of separate strokes like that. Let me just backtrack, and you can see I'm just pushing some of this texture along. I'm going to turn the opacity down even further to around 10%. Now I just want to keep adding noise, keep adding texture into this area, keep it quite subtle and quite loose. Again, it's more about the effect. I help get you to the stage where it roughly looks right, but then if you really want to spend the time just fine tuning and getting the absolute finest detail close up, looking right, then that's something you can take forward yourself. But if I just get you to the point where it looks pretty decent and realistic from a distance, from a zoomed out perspective, then I feel like I've helped you make a step forward perhaps. So we're going to go along to the black colour, or it's not quite black, but it's close to it. Reduce the size of the brush to the lower end of 2%. And I can just start to add some black colour in here, so really define perhaps the bottom edge of that band at the top, because we've almost got like a thinning here and then it gets wider at the top section. So just at the bottom of that top section, I'm just creating a little bit of clarity along the edge, but it is broken and it's just with this black colour. And then in this section here as well, I'm just going to add some extra noise, some texture. Again, I'm not really getting too bogged down in the exacting details of this, so some of it might just be bits of things that are washed up onto the shoreline. We don't really need to specify what it is. As long as we're creating texture and noise, then we can imagine perhaps what it is. So I'm just really going over and over and over, building up the texture. If I want to increase the power of that, I can go up to about 30%. Reserve the black for things that we're getting a bit closer to us. If we do overdo the black colour, we can always subdue it later on, so it's not an end of the world, but try and just limit the amount of the sheer black colour as it comes closer to us on this side. So again, if you wanted to increase the size of the brush to, I wouldn't go much higher than about 3% for this detail. You can just tap in some slightly bigger textures and blobs, and then turn it back down again to the lower end of 2%. Again, we're still on quite strong with around 30% opacity, and I'm just going to go back into here and just lightly start to build up dashes, dots, especially where it starts to reach the edge here. It will start to just disintegrate from that point, break up, fragment along that line. Now you might get some areas where there's tufts of grass and it's all collecting in one area. Maybe it doesn't get impacted by the water quite as much. You might get some real dark sections where it's collections of organic matter. Go back to our colours, and we can select one of the colours from the top to bring down into our environment. So I'm going to go for this quite bright colour here. So I'm really going to have to turn the power of that down, the impact of it down, by putting it to around 5% opacity and around the middle of 2%. And underneath this dark section here at the bottom of that band, I'm going to contrast it with a lighter tone. So it's almost like the water reveals banding of colours. So you've got an area here followed by a dark section, and then it's contrasted with a couple of light bands that go underneath it. And likewise here, I'm going to take a little bit lower down, perhaps just increase the size of that to just into 3%, and just along this edge, just hints of that light colour creeping in. In fact, that's a little bit too big, that brush, so we'll take it back down to 2%. We're really on low opacity, but it doesn't take much to introduce this colour into this edge. Okay, we can come back to that and add more texture, but I'm going to create another layer. And I'm going to start using these colours to bring all the light down onto the wet area of the sand. Anywhere where it's been wet is going to reflect down some of the colours from the sky. So I'm going to go to my second colour along. I'm going to stick with the soft airbrush, but I'm going to put it at top end of 2% and just reduce the power of it by putting it at around 50% opacity. And I'm just going to start making some decisions about where I want it to come up to. So it's going to, in some areas, rise up, and then it might, in some areas, dip back down. And we're almost creating sort of waves as it comes in and out. Something like that. And then as it goes further into the distance, as I reduce my brush to the lower end of 2%, there's quite a lot of variation even just within the 2%. And then as it comes into this section, we can just have it raising. Now it's all at this angle because it's water climbing up the beach. Just try and stick to your, bands up and down, all generally going in that direction. Imagine like a seesawing up and down in that kind of an angle. But as it gets further along here, those ripples are going to appear smaller, narrower, like this, until they kind of reach the water there. Now you can just go back in. We've got the narrower brush selected, and we can manipulate this with the blur tool a little later on as well, but we just need to do something with this edge. In fact, before we do that, let's just fill some of this in. So we're really starting to bring some of the light down into our scene, so we can just fill from that edge in that direction. It helps if we perhaps use that direction of brush mark as well, because the water splashes up or rises up and then it drags back down and brings things with it, and anything that is moving in that general direction is going to create a general movement. So we might as well move our brush marks in the same direction too, even if we pretty much fill it in. And maybe we'll see some of this area. Now all of that is on a separate layer. So if you decide that you want to manipulate it, you can go to the transform tool, select the freeform, and then if you wanted to bring it further in and reduce or change it in any sense, then you can do that. Now I feel like I want to take it more into the scene over here, so that's why I'm doing it, and just reduce it down a little bit there perhaps. And I feel that perhaps works better. It gives me a little bit more room to play with the water in this area too. And I'm going to need to have some area here to do a reflection of the sun on the shore here as well. So let's even distort that even further. So let's try that. And if you drag it from the corner, if you press and hold and drag it from the corner, you can actually distort it. So if I wanted it to join up in that area, I can press and hold there and let it distort and drag it across, and you can see it stays there, but it brings this whole section further down there to suit. So I press and hold from the corner, and again you can see that it keeps certain bits more similar and distorts only certain areas. So use the tools to your advantage, like that. Go back to my brush, still on the soft brush, still on around 3% and 50% opacity. We'll just fill some of this in just to block it in for now, but we'll go over it with some different colours. Let's just get rid of some of that empty area. So we're going to create another layer, go back to my colours. I'm going to use this colour at the top and that colour at the top. I'm going to alternate between the two, and I'm going to use it just to define on this new layer this section up here. Now I've just got it on 2% size and 25% opacity. So I'm just neatening that line there, and I'm going to go to my other colour, but I'm going to reduce the power of that, so about 10% opacity, and just start to lightly tap or drag in a hint of that colour as it goes across. Leave a gap, and then I'm going to start again. Perhaps leave another gap and just start to let it be more broken as it comes this way. Back to my colours. I'm going to select that first colour again. I'm not going to change the settings now, so we're on 2% and 10%. And just like we did here, where you had the ripples encroaching here, this time we're going to have the water edge. So that is where the water's been. Now we're going to actually start introducing the water itself. So this is the crashing water as it sweeps up the shoreline. So it might follow a similar shape in a general sense to where it's been. So I'm building it up gradually. Again, it's using that direction. Has to make sense with the other shapes and the shape of the sand as it rises. And let's increase the size to about 5% and the strength to around 25%. And let's just fill in this area a little bit. So we need more of that blue, or it's actually a grey. It only appears blue when it's next to the warmer colours. Let's go back to layer 5 where the beach details are. We're going to go back to our darker colours. So we'll go back to the second one in on that second row. On our airbrushing, go to our medium brush this time, and we'll put it at around 2% and just reduce it to about 20% opacity. And we're just starting to build some foreground textures, some things that are appearing on the beach. Just so it's not empty in this area really. And then we can go back to the very darkest colour, almost black. Start to just carefully in sections, just pick out some shadowed bits just to really bring out some of that texture. Maybe the odd dot along here as well. So that will do generally for the texture there. We can add a couple of other tones into it a little later. So we've got the edge of this blue. So we're going to add some more definition to this. So we're going to have to create another layer, and we're going to put this on top of everything, under the sun, but on top of everything else. We're going to use a combination of this colour and that colour on the bottom row, those two colours, second and third one in. And we're going to stick with the medium brush, turn it down to the lower end of 2% and put it at around 20% opacity. And I'm just going to start to bring out lightly some of the edge of this water as it comes in. Now it's going to have spikes that stick up, again everything in that direction, that momentum, and it's not going to be too defined until it gets a little bit further to us. So the bottom edge of this is perhaps going to create a shadow, then it disappears. Not so much on the top edge, but as we come towards the bottom edge of that shape, perhaps we create a little bit more shadow for it, like this, just so you're helping to start to define that. Now let's reduce the size or the strength of it rather to about 10%. Again, we're still on this third colour in, put the size up to 2%, slightly higher, and I'm just going to start to build in some texture here, not going overboard with it, but I'm keeping it almost like in the sense of the movement, especially on the edge. So I want it to almost describe a roundness there, because as the water comes in, it will curl over and fold in on itself. So I almost want to replicate those movements a little bit. In fact, you could even go that way with the motion of your brush strokes. Now it's going to fold in on itself a little bit along this edge, so occasionally it's going to create more of a shadow. You can keep perhaps more of a dragging motion, and then it folds in on itself at that very edge. Now this is one of the textures that's going to be the trickiest bit about this scene, so just bear with it. Try do your best, try and push this as far as you can. Water is always the most tricky bit. But we've got this shape here, which is like this orange shape. We're trying to create another version of that, almost like a snaking shape that goes along the edge here. So it's almost like a zigzag shape. So it goes down and then up and then down again. And you'll start to notice it more as it comes further to us. So it's like it's got a width really. So again, it's another banded area. Let's go back to our colours. We'll select this colour along, which is the fourth colour. We'll have it at around the 2% and we'll keep it quite low at around 10% opacity. And on the same layer that we were just adding texture into that bit, we'll just use this colour to start bringing in the next section beyond that darker area. And I'm just going to start dragging in some dappled texture into this area. I'm going to leave it a little bit broken. Now be careful not to allow your gestures to become curves like this. We want to keep it quite straight and quite short. Maybe as it gets nearer to us, we could increase the size of the brush a little bit to the top end of 2% and continue. We're just trying to build up the layers of texture here. Then we can increase the size to around 5%, turn it really low, so about 3% opacity, and just start to go over this area generally, just bring out the light in that part of the water, just ramp up the highlights there. So we're not losing the texture, but we are just softening its impact by going over it. Next, go back to our colours, we'll go for this third colour in, reduce the size of our brush to around, again to around the lower end of 2%. I do use that size brush rather a lot, but I'm just going to increase the strength of what we're doing here to around 15%. Let me check that, that seems about right. And I'm just starting to bring in fact, let's reduce the size of that brush even more to 1%. And there's just going to be sections now, just dashes, where we can interrupt that general light colour with more noise, more texture. As it gets more into the distance, it's going to get closer together and smaller, so it's going to be like more of it. So we're really trying to help build up the impression of these textures here. So press lightly. We've got it on a relatively low opacity anyway, but you need to also at the same time press lightly. So as it gets up to this area, perhaps this snake-like shape and direction here can continue perhaps and encroach in the water a little bit more. Maybe it can join up with the bank there, or the shore rather. And then maybe we could add a little bit of a darker section in the water here and there as it goes further away. And then as we get a little bit closer, we're going to increase the size of some of those little ripples, I guess. They're going to be more noticeable as individual shapes than they are further away. And this is very much a textural element to our piece. So take your time on this. Now generally for these videos, it takes me about an hour or a little bit over an hour to paint these, but then I do fast forward or speed through some of the sections where I don't talk very much. But obviously if you're following along, you might need to pause it and it might take you quite a bit longer. And you might want to take longer on these textural areas anyway, and you should do. That's what I recommend. If you need to go back, then honestly, using the pause, replaying the bits that you might be stuck on is exactly what I would expect you to be doing. So don't feel that you need to follow along in real time and expect it to be keeping pace. I think that's making it extra difficult and unfair on yourself to try and aim for that. So allow yourself the possibility of pausing it and catching up. And and then hopefully that helps. Now, as we get along this edge, it's not going to be quite as regular shaped really, so it's going to be a series of blotches, broken shapes. Perhaps we could even increase the size to the top end of 2%, increase the opacity to 25%, and we can just start to bring in more blobs. We want to leave obvious gaps between them in places. And we're going to increase the sense that there's a contrast along this edge as well. So it's really quite a broken texture along here. Sometimes you'll get a whole series that line up as a wave, and we can start to increase that sense. So we'll just create a little bit of a wave there, just by going over it a few times, change direction. And you can see you've got a bit that's condensing into a shadowed area, so it creates a wave impression. The next thing I'm going to do, create another layer. I'm going to consider where we need to put the reflection on this area here as well. So we're going to go to our colours. We'll probably use this orange colour and this orange colour and some of the yellow as well. So a mixture of those three. Let's just test that orange colour. So make sure we're still on the airbrushing. Medium brush. In fact, let's change back to the soft brush. Put it about 4% size and around 20% opacity. And I'm just going to start building in slightly offset. Now, I've looked at a few photographs and it seems to be that something peculiar happens when we have the sun reflected on a seashore like this, and there's water coming in, and it seems to drag off the reflection of the sun in a strange way. So we're just going to drag it off in the way that it's observed. I don't entirely know the science of that or the reasoning, but it is quite consistently there when I've observed it in different images, so we'll stick with that idea. And I'm just generally keeping it in this area, steering off like this. Not too much. And then we can go to our other colours, go to this colour. Again, just lightly pick out the centre area. Not too much. Go to our yellow colour. Let's bring out the centre of that, so it really brings out some of the light now. Once you've created that effect, we can actually experiment with something like the bloom. So we'll try the bloom within the adjustments, try the whole layer, and let's just move that along a little bit. So you can really overdo it perhaps. We don't need to take it that far. Perhaps somewhere around there will work for us. Now once we've got that, we can go along with our smudge tool, reduce the size of that to around the lower end of 2%, put it about the 40% strength, and we can just use the smudge tool just to disrupt that even more by dragging it left and right like this. And that's going to help create a bit more of a texture on the sand, like there's water, and that really helps that effect. I'm just going to stick with this smudge tool. I'm going to go back to the layer that was here, and I'm going to do exactly the same kind of thing along this edge. We're just going to soften that in. Perhaps even turn the strength of it up to around 60% or just beyond, just to break up that edge, just the same motion that we did with that section there, just to get the impression that it's really blending into the sand area there. Let's go for it. Let's really ram this up to 100% and we'll continue that idea. Let's increase the size of the brush to the top end of 2%. Let's see how far we can push this without ruining it, and you can see it's just bleeding some of that in a little bit better. So that's working nicely for the sand, the wet sand area. On this layer I'm also going to add some darker tones, so I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to pick the third colour in at the bottom, but I'm going to reduce the impact of it to only about 10%. And I'm going to put it at the lower end of 2%, and I'm just going to start building in some lines here that cut across this section, and it's again using the direction that the water would have been going up the beach. I'm just generally using it just to help sell that illusion a little bit more, especially in this area. It's too far away there to really notice it that much, so we can stop it at around this point, but we really need to focus it in for this section. Now if you feel like you've gone too far, not difficult to fix, you go to the smudge tool, increase the size to around 4%, and you can just drag some of that in a little bit more. Go back to my brush tool again. Let's start to maybe just focus in one or two of the streaks when it gets really close to us. Like that. I think that's working quite well for this section. One of the areas that needs a little bit more work now is perhaps the water. So let's just focus in on this area. Go back to our water layers, predominantly this layer. Let's stick with the soft brush at the lower end of 2%, and we're going to use one or two of these darker tones. So we'll go for that colour. It's a slightly purple colour. We'll have it at around the 15% strength, and we just want to build on some darker tones, some shadow areas here, some slightly bigger ripples perhaps that cut into this area. Perhaps to go slightly raise up and then go down, and then drag across. And water is one of those types of textures that you could really spend a long time trying to master, and this painting is getting a general sense of it, but there's definitely more to be learnt about water textures than I'm showing you here. I'm just trying to get the overall effect in place, and maybe we can spend a future tutorial just really focusing in on the exacting texture of just water. I feel like it's a separate lesson in itself. So I'm just trying to get a rough sense in for now, just to get the general, like an impressionistic version of the water without actually getting too technical with it. So again, alternate between those two colours, perhaps increase the strength a little bit more to around 30%, reduce the size down to really on the lowest edge of 2%, and just start to, I guess, around this edge, create a little bit of a dark shadow along that line. The bottom edge of that water, for example, is going to be a little bit crisper. In places anyway. Other times it'll blend in a bit better, and you can just have it sort of fading out with just a hint of it fading off. And then just keep adding to the noise until it seems to look right for you. Alternate between your colours, so you can go to your lighter colours. I'll just show you that again. I'm going for that colour just to help pick out perhaps some highlights too along that top edge. Go back to our grey colour. Let's increase the size of that to around 4%. Just turn it back down a little bit to about 20%. And let's just bring in some of that blue tone. I think that will help a bit more as well. And we can just encourage the sense that it is blending in there just by giving it a bluey tone, a bluey tinge. And also just generally increase the believability. Create noise, create texture. The rest of the illusion will pretty much sell the fact that that's supposed to be water anyway. Go to my darker colour, reduce my brush to 1%, and it's still at the 20%. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit just to pick out some of the bottom sections here, create a little bit of a crisp edge just in some tiny sections, but not all of it. And then reduce it down to 10% opacity, increase it up back to the 2, and maybe there can just be some sections surrounding it where it fades in and out of the sand as well generally. And just with this darker tone, just to create a little bit more noise as it blends there together. Just one or two sections here where perhaps you just get a little bit of a contrast, especially around this edge. You're going to get some darker tones mixed in, just some dark blobs. Just increase the strength to 20% with this dark colour. So we're on this colour here, which is second in from the right. And along this edge, I'm just going to start using that darker tone to create breaks in this general colour. along this edge. So it's like a mottled kind of look. And really this is the kind of finishing touch that should really start to finish it off, create that overall illusion. I mean, you can't really start with this effect because there's not enough general texture to make sense of this. But when you've got enough general noise and then you start adding this in, then it will start to fall into place. And similar along here, along the very edge, just some blobs like a mottle look with this dark colour. Don't stress yourself out if you're finding this difficult. Water is quite tough. Have a go. Trial and error. It's tough. It's difficult. Go back to our layers. I feel like we need to do a little bit more in this corner just to perhaps fine tune that section. So we've got the two colours here and here. So again, we're still on the, if I just check, we're still on the 2% size and we're on about the 20% opacity. So let's just fine tune some of this texture in here. Try to make it look a little less like brush marks. In fact, we could do that with the smudge tool, couldn't we? So let's use the smudge tool, reduce it down to around 3% or top end of 2%, just reduce the strength of it back to about 60%. And let's just blur some of these brush marks in so they don't look quite so clumsy. It's a really useful technique actually to smudge brush marks that look ugly into your scene. It gives it a slightly soft focus look, but it's sometimes better than an ugly brush mark. And you can do that for anywhere that just isn't making sense. You can smudge it until it all blends in a little bit more. And yeah, can just generally work a little bit better. You can use it to define an edge if you need it to be a little bit sharper in places. So you can push it around until it does exactly what you need it to. You can even use it to start nibbling away at the edges if you want to create a sense that there's grass and texture at the top. You can do that with a smudge tool just by, like I'm doing, sort of nibbling back into that line. Such a great tool. It's as good as a brush tool really in many ways. Okay, last couple of details are going to go up to the layer 9, create another layer, go back to my colours. I'm going to use this colour. I'm going to increase the size of my brush to around 7%, put it really low on the strength at around 5%, and I'm just going to start building in some of this real warm tone here now. Just take a couple of circular motions, build it in like that. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but it's just helping bringing some of that information together. It knocks back this bit of the distant landscape and it's just a nice finishing touch. And if you've not quite achieved a smooth effect, again, we can just go back to our Gaussian blur, affect the whole layer, just blur it in as much as it needs to be done, just to help soften that in. If you want to increase the impact of that sun, well, that's something we can do too. We can go to the sun layer, go to the adjustments, go to the bloom, affect the whole layer, and just take it up a notch. And it really sells the illusion that it's a strong light source. Okay, I'm going to leave this painting here at this point. If you've enjoyed following along, then make sure to hit that subscribe button, press the bell notification to make sure you do get notified. There are links down in the description of the video for my Instagram page where you can tag me in anything you do, and there's also a Facebook group that you can join as well and share your work with me and the other people there. Give the video a like, leave me a comment, it really helps the video out and the channel, and I'll see you back here soon. See you later.